cost of $250 and $180, is that $430? All right, and they have a fair value of $490. So we need to write them up. So what are we going to do? Debit, fair value, was that 60,000?
Yeah.
And credit, unrealized holding gain dash income. Unrealized holding gain dash income. Oh, and that's it. So there was a C. Okay. Turn over and look at problem 1. Okay, presented below is an amortization schedule related to Spangler Company's 5-year, $100,000 bond with a 7% interest rate and a 5% yield, purchased on December 31st of 15 for $108,660. You see the amortization chart there, and then below that it says the following schedule presents a comparison of the amortized cost and fair value of the bonds on each of the 5-year ends. A says, prepare the journal entry to record the purchase of these bonds at December 31 of 15, assuming the bonds are classified as held to maturity securities. Okay? December 31 of 15, what would we do? Debit, debt investments, dash HTM, held to maturity. And it's 108,660. Credit cash. Okay? Now what does GAAP say about how these should be accounted for?
At amortized cost. Amortized cost.
At amortized cost. Okay? And right now, the amortized cost is 108,660. Okay? Look at B. B says, prepare the journal entry or entries related to the held to maturity bonds for 2016. Okay? So we would date this December 31 of 16. Okay, look at the amortization chart. You should debit cash 7,000. You should credit interest revenue for the amount that they show you, which is 5433. And then, what are we headed for over here? What is the face value of these bonds? 100,000. So we're going to make a series of credits to reduce this to its face value at maturity. So the other credit is going to be to debt investments dash HTM, and the amortization is 1567. So then I would post that, 1567. Questions? So now the amortized cost has changed. It's no longer 108,660, it's now 108,660 minus 1567. Questions? So you notice there is no premium account, there is no discount account. We just use directly to this specific asset account. Questions? That's different than what we did in chapter 14 when we issued the bonds. We're buying these as an investment. Okay, C says, prepare the journal entry or entries related to these bonds for 2018. Okay, they skipped a little bit, didn't they? They skipped a whole year. Well, we probably need to do that though. For 17, the amortization would be 1646. Right? That's the year that's missing. They didn't ask us to do, but we probably should update, and so we did. And then here we go for 12/31 of 18. It's going to be a debit to cash of 7,000, a credit to interest revenue, and a credit to debt investments. And the interest revenue will be 5272. And then 1728. Okay, so if I were to give you something like this on the exam, I might ask you, what is the amortized cost of these investments at December 31, 18? And the answer would be 103,719. 103,719. Questions? Okay. All right, now go to D. D says, prepare the journal entries to record the purchase of these bonds, assuming they are classified as available for sale securities. So now they want us to completely change. And so on the date we bought them, it would be a debit to debt investments, AFS 108,660, and a credit to cash. Okay, now how do we account for available for sale securities? They are reported on the balance sheet at fair value. Okay, so that's different. So again, I'm going to create we need a fair value adjustment account. Okay? Okay, E says, prepare the journal entries related to these available for sale bonds for 2016. Well, the first thing we have to do is the same thing that we did here. So we're going to debit cash, credit interest revenue, and credit debt investments, dash AFS, for the same amount, 7,000, 5433, and 1567. Okay, so what's the amortized cost at 12/31 of 16?
107.93.
107,093, right? but available for sale securities are reported at fair value. So what is the fair value on December 31st of 16? We gotta look at that little chart below there. 106,500. $106,500. So, do we need a debit in the fair value adjustment account, or do we need a credit in the fair value adjustment account? Credit of how much?
The difference.
Table.
593.
You trying out for a comedy tour, Mr. Jackson? How much is the difference? Huh? 593? Okay, so the second adjusting entry on 12/31 of 16 would be, what are you gonna debit? Unrealized holding loss dash income. No, available for sales equity.
Equity.
593 and credit fair value adjustment dash AFS 593. Okay, now by the way, folks, in order to, if I were to give you a problem like this on the exam, I'm looking for, this is part of your answer, and this is part of the answer. This is part of the answer, and this is part of the answer. All of it you gotta give me if you want the full credit, including the dollar amount. Okay, tell me where the unrealized holding gain or loss goes. And then fair value adjustment related to what? Related to my available for sale securities. Because if I have trading securities, they're gonna be accounted for separately, right? Okay, so now they want us to do the same thing for 12/31 of 18. But, now here's where we really do need to use what happened in 17. In 17, the amortization of the premium is $16.46. So tell me what the amortized cost was at the end of 17. It was 105,447. What was the fair value at 12/31 of 17? Ms. Jones?
107,500.
107,500. Okay, so now we draw a line and we say, if this is 105,447, do I need a debit or do I need a credit to get me to 107,500? Ms. Toomey? Debit, okay? For how much?
2053.
2003?
2053.
2053. Oh, yeah. Are you with me? They're not asking us to do that journal entry, but we do need to know what the balance in this account is before we can do it for 18. Are you with me? Okay, so now for 18, the first thing we're going to do is the same thing we did a minute ago. Debit cash, 7,000. Credit interest revenue for 5272. And credit debt investments dash AFS for 1728. So, what is my new amortized cost at 12/31 of 18?
103,
793,
103, 719.
719. Okay. Okay, so you prepare the adjusting entry to adjust it to fair value. Go. Where's that noise coming from?
Right next door to
That room?
construction.
What are they doing in there?
Why don't you go ask them?
Well, I wish they'd do it some other time too. Are you ready? So, if we want to get to 105,650, we need a debit to add to the 103,719. How much does this debit need to be, Mr. Bland?
1931.
Say again?
1931.
1931. Okay, so what are you gonna do, Mr. Jackson?
Debit fair value adjustment, credit unrealized holding gain, dash equity. For 1931.
If I debit this account, am I not increasing it? I wanna go from 2053 down to 1931. I need to credit this account. Right?
22.
How much? 122?
That's what
So what's the debit? Unrealized holding loss dash equity, 122, and credit fair value adjustment dash AFS, 122. Questions? Could you have done that amortization chart if they didn't give it to you? For cash received, it's face value times stated rate times time. For interest revenue, it's carrying value times market rate times time. For the bond premium amortization, it's the difference between the first two columns. Questions? Do you see what you did now, Mr. Jackson?
Yeah, I didn't make a T account, so I kind of.
I noticed nobody does T accounts on their homework. Why do you think I do T accounts? Because they help. Okay. Look at problem 7. The following information relates to the debt securities investments of Wildcat Company. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. A says, prepare the journal entries you consider necessary, including year-end entries at December 31, assuming these are available for sale securities. All right? So what happened in number 1? It says, on February 1, the company purchased 10% bonds of Gibbons Company having a par value of $300,000 at 100 plus accrued interest, and interest is payable on April 1 and October 1. And we bought them on February 1. Okay? What are we going to do? Debit?
Debt investments,
Debt investments,
interest revenue.
dash,
Oh,
AFS.
yeah.
What is the cost of these debt investments? 100% or 300,000? Okay, then skip a line. And we're going to credit cash. Okay, not only did we pay 300,000, but we also had to pay the interest that has happened since the bonds last paid interest. When did the bonds last pay interest? October 1. So how many months would that be? October, November, December, and January. Right? So 300,000 times 10% times 4/12. 10,000. So the cash that we paid was 310,000. Are you with me? Okay, now, remember back in chapter 14 when we issued the bonds between interest payment dates, we had an abnormal balance in an account. What was that abnormal balance, or in what account do we have that abnormal balance? Interest expense, okay? This time we're on the other side of the transaction. Interest revenue. And it's going to be a debit. See how the same concepts keep coming back and forth. Okay? So now we need to create a T account. All right? Let's go to number 2. Number 2 says, the bottom of the page, on April 1, the semi-annual interest is received. Okay, that is the semi-annual interest on these bonds. So what are we going to do? Debit? Cash. For 300,000 times 10%, it's 30,000 for half a year's 15. And what are we going to credit?
Interest revenue.
Interest revenue. 15. So now what is the balance in the interest revenue account?
5,000.
5,000 on the credit side, which is what we want. How we doing? All right. Go to number 3. On July 1, 9% bonds of Ch17 were purchased. These bonds have a par value of 200,000 and were purchased at 100 plus accrued interest. Interest dates are June 1 and December 1. Okay, so what are we going to do? Debit, debt investments dash
AFS.
AFS. For how much?
200,000.
200,000. Well, since we just did one like this, we know we're going to also debit interest revenue and credit cash. Okay? 200,000 times 9% is 18,000 divided by 12. Is that 1,500?
Yes.
So how long has it been? Ooh, only a month. So only 1,500. Everybody follow that? The accrued interest only happened from June to July 1 month. So now, we need to add to our account questions? Okay, look at number 4. On September 1, bonds with a par value of 60,000 that were purchased on February 1 are sold at 99 plus accrued interest. So this is some of the first bonds that we bought. So bonds having a par value of 60,000. So we sold bonds, so we got some cash. How much cash did we get?
59,400.
Okay, it'll be 99% of 60,000, but didn't we also get some interest? So I'm gonna do it like this. 60,000 times 99% plus 60,000 times 9% times, how long has it been? How long?
4 months. 5. Yeah, it's 5, I'm pretty sure.
5 months, 5/12. Because we're talking about these bonds. So this you told me is 59,400?
That's 20.
Okay, that's 54, how much is this?
2250.
Huh?
2250.
It's 25.
2,500.
I got 2,500.
Okay.
That's 2,500.
It's 2,500.
Yeah.
Somebody just said 2250.
Maybe, I guess I'm wrong.
Are you gonna get right anything today, Mr. Jackson?
You're right though, 2250 is what it is.
Oh my God!
Well, the whole answer is
Wait a
61,650.
minute, she's talking.
If you're referring to the February 1st one,
I can't hear you.
If we're referring to the February first bonds, will we do the 10%?
Yeah, it's the wrong person.
Yes, that's right, that's the wrong percentage too. So,
It is 2,500.
6,000, 5,000? Right? 5. So now it,
It's half of that.
no, it's still 2,500.
Yeah.
What the?
60,000 times 10% is gonna be 6,000. 6,000 divided by 12 is 500. 500 times 5 is 2,500.
These bonds. So we paid that last payment down before, so then we had to.
So now, the debit to cash, and I'm gonna move my debit and credit further out because I did all that writing there. It'll be 61,900.
Yes.
The debit to cash is 61,900. Okay, what are we going to credit?
Loss on sale of investment.
No.
Skip a line and credit debt investments
Dash AFS,
dash AFS for
60.
60,000. Okay, some of that cash we got was interest revenue, right? So credit, interest, revenue. How much was it? 2,500. So if you paid 100% for these $60,000 bonds, and then you sold them for 99, you have a loss on them, don't you? This is loss on sale of debt investments. And how much should your loss be? 600 bucks. 1% or 600. And 62.5 equals 62.5. Question. Okay. So now I hope you can see we've only got 240 of these first bonds, but we still have all 200 of the second bonds. All right. The next one says October 1, the semi-annual interest is received. Okay, that's these bonds. The ones that we only have $240,000 worth left. So this is going to be a debit to cash and a credit to interest revenue. And this is going to be for $240,000 times 10% times 612. 12,000? Okay. Number 6. The December 1 semi-annual interest is received. That's on the second bonds. So again, we're going to debit cash, credit interest revenue, this time 200,000 times 9% times 612, 9,000? Questions? And then number 7. On December 31, the fair value of the bonds purchased on February 1 and July 1 are 95 and 93 respectively. So these, I'm going to say 95%, these 93%. Okay? All right? What do I need to do? Say what?
No entry?
Say it again.
No entry?
I hear you say interest. What's the
You
first part?
said no
No
entry.
entry.
No interest?
No entry.
No entry. Ooh, bad. No. Gotta do. We account for available for sale securities at fair value. So we got to reflect the fair value, but there's something we need to do before that. What do we need to do? Bonds, unlike stock, bonds, the interest accrues. You don't have to declare it, right? So haven't we earned some interest on the first bond since October 1 and on the second bond since December 1? So what are we going to debit? What account?
Interest receivable.
Interest receivable. What you gonna credit? Interest revenue. Now that's an adjusting entry. So for the first bonds, you're gonna take 240,000 times 10% times, how long has it been? October, November, December. 3/12 of a year. And for the other bonds, it's 200,000 times 9% times 1/12, because they just paid interest on December the 1st. So only 1 month has passed. So 24,000, 1/4 of 24/6, and 1,500, 7,500. Questions? Questions? Okay. So now, the $240,000 bonds have a fair value of 95%, and the $200,000 bonds have a fair value of 93%. 186. 5%.
228.
8 and 6 is 14, 4 carry 1, 3 and 8 11, 1 carry 1, 4, 14. So, we need a fair value adjustment dash AFS account. All right, for this is going to be 440. So the fair value we want to be 414,000. So what should the adjusting entry look like? Ms. Finch? Debit dash equity, good. How much?
26,000.
26,000 is correct. Credit
Fair value adjustment, AFS.
dash AFS, 26,000. That is correct. Questions? Do you feel better about this chapter now? After working on it this weekend and doing some homework. Questions?
The debit was a debt investment?
I'm sorry?
On that last one where you counted 26,000, what was the debit?
Unrealized holding loss dash equity. and credit fair value adjustment dash AFS.
The only thing I'm confused about is whenever you buy it, and then you add, like, the cost is so-and-so plus interest, do you always do it from the last interest paid?
Of
And then, like,
course.
Well, I just,
Yeah, I mean, because that's what you're in essence paying in advance, the interest for the time that has lapsed since the last payment of interest. So if you're buying it on February 1, the last time those bonds paid interest is October 1. They haven't, I mean, not April 1, April 1's in the future from February 1.
oh, okay. Okay, so there I get it.
Questions? Now, folks, I'll tell you, this is a chapter that students struggle with. And I think the reason is because it's very different, very unusual. Got a lot of new account titles. You're making fair value adjustments at year end. You got to keep up with whether we're talking about stocks or bonds. If they're bonds, it depends on what category they fall in. But if they're stocks and they're marketable securities, we account for all of them at fair value, with unrealized gains and losses flowing through income. Questions? All right. Please get out your class notes for chapter 12. What do you know about intangible assets? Don't give me examples. What do you know about it? Say what? Okay. So one thing is they lack physical substance. They lack physical substance. What's the second thing? They are not financial instruments. For example, they're not receivables. Receivables exist only on paper, but receivables are specifically excluded because receivables are a financial instrument. Bonds are a financial instrument. Stocks are financial instruments. Those things are specifically excluded. Okay? There are two basic types of intangibles. They are definite life intangibles and, no, I'm sorry. They call that limited life. Limited life intangibles and indefinite. Limited life means there's something about that, whatever that intangible asset is, that limits its life. Okay? So limited life intangibles would be something like a franchise, a license, a patent, a copyright, non-compete covenants. What is that?
Make an employee enter into a contract that said they can't go work for a competitor for X amount of time, like a year or whatever.
Okay, but from an accounting standpoint, what we're really talking about is you buy somebody's business and you don't want them to go in to that similar business and start competing with you immediately. Right? Because here you're paying something for that. If you were to buy Fusakli's, you certainly would not want Fusakli's people to turn around and start creating restaurants right next door to you. Right? Now, in order to be enforceable, covenants, non-compete covenants have to be reasonable in duration and reasonable in geography. Could you, if you bought Fusakli's in Mobile and Baldwin County, could you tell them they could not go to Jefferson County in North Alabama and create Fusakli's? No. That would be unreasonable. Could you say you will never be able to own a chicken tenders restaurant in Mobile or Baldwin County? No. Usually it's 2 to 3 years. Okay? What is a franchise? Give me an example of a franchise.
It's a pre-formed business.
Okay, McDonald's. Or Holiday Inn.
Outback.
I don't know if they're franchised. Are they company owned or are they franchised?
The company owned.
Company with
Oh, wait, no.
Well, I mean, you can go Marriott, I mean, go Garden Inn, we go,
A lot of the motel, hotel chains are franchise businesses.
Franchise. Honest.
Okay? What is a license? Give me an example of a license that would be an intangible asset.
What my ID?
Like a beer license, like an alcohol license?
Okay, if you have an alcohol license in a state to sell alcohol. The radio stations around here operate under a license granted by the Federal Communications Commission. And it's good for a certain period of time. They have to renew it. What is a patent? You've got the exclusive right for some idea, some invention that you've come up with, some chemical compound you've come up with. And it's good for a set period of time. It's not good for forever, because that's where we get, what do they call them? Generic drugs. Once a drug goes off patent, then other people can start using that drug. What's copyright?
that's for physical, so like a design.
Okay, it's like for artistic creation. Here we're talking about a book, a poem, a song. Things like that can be copyrighted. A work, creative work. Okay, what about an indefinite life? What about something that could exist forever? One good example is an internet domain name. Internet domain name. Trademark. Also known as a trade name. What else?
Company names,
Huh?
company names.
Company name. And goodwill. What is goodwill?
Impairment of assets.
Impairment of assets? I didn't say what is goodwill impairment.
Oh.
I'm asking what is goodwill in general.
Like donations and stuff.
I'm doing something to keep somebody in good standing with you.
Okay, here's from an accounting standpoint what goodwill is. Let's say that you're looking to buy a business, and you've looked at that business's assets and liabilities, and they total $1 million fair value. But you decide you really want this company badly, and so you're willing to pay $1.3 million. That $300,000 difference is called goodwill. The excess of the purchase price over the fair value of the identifiable net assets acquired. We cover this in 416, but you need to be aware of it now. It is the excess of cost over the fair value of the identifiable net assets acquired in a business combination. All right? Now, PP&E items we depreciate. What are we doing when we depreciate something? What's the whole point?
Adjusting it to its, adjusting the value of it to, to wear and tear or anything else that could diminish it.
So we're adjusting it to what?
I mean,
Fair value?
yeah, over time.
No.
Not fair value, I mean just like to us.
Why did you just say yeah?
Well, no, because you sounded like you're certain about
Well,
fair value.
No, it was a question. I asked a question. What is, folks, you cannot be an accounting major if you don't understand the concept of depreciation.
It's to make it
It's a
easier to
recognition.
buy another
It's
one.
not an adjustment.
It's a what?
It's not an adjustment of value. It's, like the recognition of the, like, amount of wear and tear over like the useful life.
Spreading the cost over the useful life.
Say what?
Spreading the cost over the useful life.
Thank you. It is the allocation of cost of a long-lived asset to the periods of use. You buy a van for $20,000 and it's going to be useful for 5 years and it's going to have no salvage value at the end of the 5 years. Then we're going to take that $20,000 cost and we're going to expense it over time. It's an allocation of cost of a long-lived asset to the periods that benefit from its use. So now we talk about intangible assets. The process is called amortize. Amortize. Same concept. We're allocating the cost of an intangible asset to its periods of use. Typically will be done on the straight line method. Okay, for depreciation, what does that adjusting entry look like? Since I'm running out of room over there. Debit depreciation expense and credit accumulated depreciation. What kind of journal entry is that? That's an adjusting entry. Okay? What will it look like to record amortization expense? Debit, amortization expense, and credit. Now here we have two options. Two different approaches are acceptable for GAAP purposes. You can set up accumulated amortization, but nobody does that. What most companies do is they simply credit the intangible asset directly. Credit the intangible asset directly. And our problems in this book tell us to do that. Turn over to page 614, please. Look at illustration 12-1. This is very important. First of all, they break it out to limited life intangibles and indefinite life intangibles. They tell you how you account for it depends on how it is created. Manner acquired, it says. If you purchased it, they say the appropriate accounting treatment is to capitalize. What does capitalize mean?
Amortize it? No.
I cannot believe
You add it to the
y'all
cost
know
of what
nothing.
you pay.
Huh?
You add it, you add it to the cost.
To capitalize means to put it on the balance sheet. Capitalize means to put it. What was a capital lease obligation in 371?
Don't ask me.
It was one that you had to book as both a liability and an asset on your balance sheet. When we purchase a van, we capitalize it. You debit van. You don't debit the expense, you debit an asset. So, regardless of which type, if you purchase an intangible asset, then you capitalize it. Okay, but what if you create one internally? What if you're a pharmaceutical company and you are looking for some magic formula that would cure diabetes? And you're paying people to work on this all the time. Doctors, medical researchers, scientists, helpers, all that. They're funding it internally. They didn't go out and buy somebody else's patent. They're trying to develop the patent internally. What is the proper accounting treatment for that? Expensed as incurred. Why?
You don't know how much it's gonna
You don't know what?
be. We haven't developed an asset, right?
Well, there you go. First of all, you don't know that you're ever going to get something that's worthwhile, right? I mean, believe me, there have been people trying to find cures for cancer and high blood pressure and lots of other things that still are looking for them. So, because of the questionable nature of it, we're not going to record it as an asset because an asset is defined as an economic benefit. We don't know that this is ever going to result in an economic benefit. But look what it says. There's an asterisk by the word expense. It says, except for certain direct costs, such as legal fees. So once you get to the point where you have a patentable product and the Food and Drug Administration has approved your drug, now we can file legal documents with the U.S. Patent Office, and we're probably going to have to get an attorney who's skilled in this area to file a patent application for us. And we can capitalize that cost because now we know we have an asset. We cannot capitalize the cost leading up to that point. Do you understand the difference? It's key that you understand the distinction between these two. Okay, now, amortization is the next column. Amortization says if it's a limited life, one of these, amortize over its useful life. Really, the rule is the lesser of legal life or useful life. The lesser of useful life or legal life. And then for indefinite life intangibles, we do not amortize them. Because look, they may exist forever. So what period of time are you going to amortize them over? You can't. So the next thing you have to do is you have to test them for impairment. Test for impairment. And you will notice that for limited life intangibles, it's a two-step process, and this you should have learned in 371 having to do with PP&E. You first do the recoverability test. You have a patent, let's say, and that patent is on the books for $1 million. What is the recoverability test?
Estimates cash flows expected from use of that asset.
Thank you. We project out the cash flows from over the remaining useful life of this asset. Now, we do not take the present value. You take the undiscounted cash flows. So in other words, look at this. If this has 5 more years of life, you would say, okay, what are the cash flows in each of these years? Write them down. Add them up, compare them to the million. If the cash flows total at least 1 million, you're not impaired. Don't have to go to step 2. But what do we know about what if all the cash flows come out here? What if there was 1 million 5 years from now? 0, 0, 0, 0, and then 1 million. Would that be the same as 200,000, 200,000, 200,000, 200,000, 200,000? Well, they're both 1 million.
No, because of the value of the dollar.
The what?
The value of the dollar after.
Okay, so what are we talking about?
I mean.
The present value.
Present value of, yeah.
But we don't take present value for this purpose.
No.
We do not discount it to present value. So, if I were to look at this, if I were to say, in one scenario, all the cash flows come in year 5, and in the other scenario, all the cash flows come in year 1, for this test, they're exactly equal. Which is stupid. Because you and I both know, how many times have we done present value in here?
Too much.
Lots of times. Here, we're saying, I'll forget present value. And think about it. If this patent had a 15-year life, we could make it even more absurd by putting all the cash flows out here in year 15. You'll get a whole different number I mean, remember that problem we did in chapter 14 where we had a zero interest bearing bond and it was due in 20 years? The present value was something like 8 million and the face value was 25 million. So the real value can be a whole lot less than the face value, the maturity value. So in the first case, you do a recoverability test to see, do my future cash flows at least total up to the asset value? If the answer is yes, stop, no impairment. If the answer is no, then you have to write the asset down to its fair value, which they will give us in these problems. Questions?
You said if the future cash flows do equal
If the future cash flows total at least the amount of the asset's carrying value, no impairment. And of course, the opposite would be if they don't total, then you've got impairment. Okay? We have a related topic. Please turn to page 628. Please do not confuse intangible assets and something called research and development expense. Research and development expense may be incurred in trying to develop a patent. I mean, pharmaceutical companies, this is what they do. Now, there's a lot of controversy regarding pharmaceutical companies because they charge for their drugs. And sometimes people like to say they're charging too much for their drugs. Okay? All right, now, I can understand that if I'm somebody who needs that drug to live, then I want that drug to be as cheap as possible, right? On the other hand, we don't know how much that company spent trying to develop that drug in the first place. And they got to make that money back during the patent period for that drug, right? Plus, think about all the other drugs they tried to develop that never amounted to anything. You know, an example, Dr. Van has a son who is having some medical issues now. And he is on an experimental treatment that's not approved. I mean, it's not approved for general usage. It can only be used in these clinical trials. So they're trying to see, okay, it does what it's supposed to do, but does it also have related negative side effects that outweigh the good stuff that it does? I mean, you know, a drug that's going to make you have a heart attack and die, even if it does lower your blood pressure, probably is not something you want to do. So I'm in a quandary. For example, a few years ago I read in Fortune magazine, there was an article about dementia drugs. Okay? And years ago, back when Reagan was diagnosed in the early 90s with Alzheimer's, I think it was Alzheimer's, there was a lot of pharmaceutical companies looking to try to find the cure to dementia. Okay? What they found is that when someone died of dementia and they did an autopsy, there would be like a horseshoe-shaped imaging of their brain, with the horseshoe part being the part that was dead. And they a bunch of researchers thought it was protein A that caused the brain to die, and other people thought it was protein B. So they all go off and conduct clinical trials to figure out, is it A or is it B? And nobody ever had good results. And they also discovered that by the time you could figure this out, people tended to die quickly. They'd be diagnosed with dementia, and within 18, 24 months, they might be dead. So the pharmaceutical companies looked at this and said, okay, even if we come up with a cure or a treatment that slows the progression, if they're going to die in 24 months, then we're not going to have time to make our money back. So they all quit. Nobody was working on dementia anymore. So then one guy with a startup pharmaceutical company came up with this idea: what if we could scan the brains of people well before they start showing any signs? I wonder if we could see the early stages of the brain beginning to die. And actually in the Fortune magazine article, they showed this. So they could predict like years in advance that you were developing dementia. So now all of a sudden, people are saying, wow, if we can diagnose them 10 years before they may die, and we can slow the progression, everybody wants to produce high blood pressure and diabetes medications. Because once you got high blood pressure, you're going to have it. Well, pretty much. Diabetes too. You might have it the last 20 years of your life. So those are big money makers. So everybody wants to compete for those. So now all the pharmaceutical companies are starting to get back out their protein A and protein B. And what this guy said when they interviewed him, the guy that came up with the idea of doing scans of the brain of people that do not show any signs yet. His point was, maybe it is protein A, maybe it's protein B, maybe it's both of them. But the fact is, once we can see it, it's too late. I mean, once we get to this point, we can't, it's like you've been bitten by a snake and too much time has passed and you're going to die. If they could have gotten to you sooner. So his point was that he really thought the breakthrough of being able to do the brain scans and see this years before it's going to come to fruition was a great breakthrough, because he says it may be protein A, it may be protein B. So all the unsuccessful trials that were done in the past perhaps were unsuccessful because it was done too late. Maybe they were doing the right things, it's just it was too late. The patient had passed the point of help. So my thing is, and I know this guy that you've seen it in the news. He bought this drug that I think is critical to some people's life, and he immediately increased the price 5,000%. And they called him before Congress, and well, you don't have to buy it, was his point. Now, he went to prison for something else, but he didn't go to prison for gouging on a pharmaceutical compound. There's a show on him now on CNBC, what do they call that? American Greed. I think his name was Shirelli or Schreckle, or I can see him in my mind. But my point is, not only do they need to recover their investment in a successful pharmaceutical compound, but what about all the unsuccessful stuff? They spent millions and millions and millions, perhaps hundreds of millions of dollars trying to solve certain things and maybe never got anywhere for it. So I don't know what the answer is. I'd hate to be a company that had to invent new pharmaceutical compounds that successfully treat medical conditions in order to stay in business. That'd be that'd be a lot of pressure.
Yeah, but don't you think that some of the beef at pharmaceutical companies come from the excessive or seemingly excessive salaries of the executives in charge?
I don't.
And all that are paid. And I'm with you, I'm on the same end. I mean, look, if I'm laying out $100 million to develop X drug to keep these people alive, I gotta be able to recover that money. But at the same time, after I roll that drug out and it costs $5,000 for a month's supply, why does my executive get a $10 million bonus?
Well, what if you're the medical doctor who invented that? Should you be entitled?
Oh, I mean, I don't disagree with you. I'm just saying that I think that I think the beef lies more with how the money is flown up through the chain, because a lot of pharmaceutical companies aren't run by doctors anymore. They're run by CEOs who are not MDs. They used to be, and they weren't as profitable and drugs weren't as expensive.
I don't know. I don't really care. Well, I think if you're a patient, you don't care where the money's going. You just want to be able to afford to get the drug.
You want to be able to wake up tomorrow.
And the drug in the long run may be a whole lot less expensive than some kind of medical intervention like surgery and chemo and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know. But what we're talking about starting on page 628 is R&D expenditures, research and development cost. This is, if you look at the bottom of this page, the R part has to do with research. This is the planned search or critical investigation aimed at the discovery of new knowledge. So we're looking for a cholesterol-lowering medication that does not have the negative side effects of some other popular cholesterol-lowering medications that are on the market today. We're trying to get rid of the negative aspects of the bad side effects. Okay? Then development activities is translating research findings or other knowledge into a plan or design for a new product or process, or an improvement, a significant improvement to an existing product or process, whether it is intended for sale or intended for us to use it internally. Now, in the U.S., whether it's R or D, we expense it as incurred. Under IFRS, the R is expensed, but the D can be capitalized. And then on page 629, this is very important. What activities can be treated as R&D? Number one, materials, equipment, and facilities. Expense the entire cost. Now that means when you buy it. Expense the entire cost unless the items have alternative future uses, whether in other R&D projects or otherwise. So here's the deal. You're Bill Gates, and you have decided you want to cure AIDS. That's what you want to be, your legacy. You're going to take all $60, $70 billion you've got, and you're going to buy a building, hire a bunch of high-profile HIV, AIDS test people, researchers who've worked in that, and just throw money at them and say, whatever you need, let me know. Okay? Well, the building would be expensed as soon as we purchase it, unless it has an alternative future use. Could we use that building in something else? Like, could we make it an office building? Yeah. Well, then we would set it up as an asset, and then when we Depreciate it, we would not call it depreciation expense, we call it research and development expense. Okay? So if we buy equipment that can be used in this R&D project or any other R&D project, we'd set it up as an asset, capitalize it, and amortize it as R&D. If the asset has no alternative use, if these supplies can only be used on this research project, then expense them as soon as you buy them. Okay? So if there are alternative uses, carry the items as inventory and allocate as consumed, or capitalize and depreciate as used. Personnel, expense as incurred, salaries, wages, and related costs of the people who are engaged in R&D activities. 3, purchased intangibles. Well, of course, you're going to record them at fair value. And then we'll treat them the way we talked about up here, whether they're limited life or indefinite life. Contract services. If you pay somebody to do something that if you did it would be R&D, then when they do it, it's R&D for you. Okay? Contract services, R&D. And then indirect cost. Include a reasonable allocation of indirect costs. You've all had accounting 381? Cost accounting? Y'all don't know if you had accounting 381? You have not. Oh. Well, indirect costs are costs that cannot be directly associated with an activity, but can be indirectly associated with an activity. And though you can allow a reasonable allocation of indirect cost. Turn to page 630 and look at illustration 12-15. In this illustration, they give you a type of expenditure on the left. In the middle, they tell you the appropriate accounting treatment for it. And then on the right, they give you the rationale. What's the logic for how we said it should be treated? So the first one is, we construct a long-range research facility for use in current and future R&D projects. Well, since it has a use in future projects, it should be capitalized and depreciated as R&D expense. Number 2, the acquisition of equipment for use only on the current project, then that needs to be expensed immediately. Are you with me? You need to go through all 14 of these examples and make sure you're cool with them. Make sure you understand them. On the next page, they talk about a few things that they say are similar to R&D. Startup costs for a new operation. When you start a new business, you often have losses the first few quarters, first few years. Nothing's different about that. Go ahead and expense them as incurred. Don't treat them any differently. Operating losses, same thing. Advertising costs, same thing. And computer software, that's very specialized, so we're not going to talk about that. Okay, let's turn in your book to look at some exercises. I am on page 638 and 639. Please number your paper 1 to 23. Number your paper from 1 to 23. Exercise 1. The following is a list of items that could be included in the intangible assets section of a balance sheet. A says, indicate whether the items on the list above would generally be reported as intangible assets on the balance sheet. And B says, if not, where should it be reported? Okay, we're gonna go through and just do it all at one time. Okay? So, we're not gonna do A and B, we're gonna do the problem, looking at number one. Now, if something belongs on the balance sheet, what are our options? When they say where, they mean where on the balance sheet? Under what category? What are our options? No.
5 different assets.
Huh?
Current assets.
Current assets. What's the next one?
Oh, in the order?
In order.
Long-term investment.
Long-term investments. PP&E. Intangible assets and other assets. Liabilities. Current liabilities. Long-term liabilities. Okay? And then equity.
Contributed.
Paid in capital and earned capital. All right, those are my options. Okay. Or it belongs on the income statement. Number one, an investment in a subsidiary company. What is that? What is a subsidiary? Mr. Rowley. What? Well, yes, that is a company that we own more than 50% of. Okay, so we have this investment in this company. Where should that be reported? First of all, is that an intangible asset? Yes or no?
No.
No. Then where should it be reported? Long-term investment. Long-term investment. Okay, number two, timberland.
No, it's a brand. I'm sure it's intangible.
What's so funny?
It's a wrapper.
Huh? Timberland.
Get that, yeah.
Miss Pitts,
Plant, property, and equipment.
she says plant, property, and equipment. Okay? What do we put, but don't write that down. What do we put in property, plant, and equipment?
Things that are gonna be used over time. Things that are gonna be used over time.
Well, it has to be something that's currently in use, right? For example, land on which our factory is built. Then we could put land and building, right? But what about a piece of land that we plan to build on 10 years from now? Is that PP&E? No. So, timberland, okay? If we're a timber company, what would your timberland be for you? Would it be PP&E? What's it called? If that's what you're in the business of doing, it would be called inventory, right? Listen, folks, listen. Let's talk about tractor trailer rigs. If we're an over-the-road trucking company, tractor trailer rigs would be PP&E for us, right? But if we are a dealership that sells tractor trailer rigs, for us it's inventory, not PP&E. So you have to think about the context of who are we? If we're a timberland company, this would be inventory for us, so it would be a current asset. However, if it's timberland that we hold as an investment, where would we put that?
Intangible assets.
Long-term investments. Or, what if we said, oh no, this is the Timberland brand? Well, then it could be an intangible asset in that case. So you'd have to tell me. Not the wrapper,
That could be a brand. I'm
Yeah,
just
he's a
saying.
brand too.
but if it's the Timberland brand, then that could be an intangible asset. Otherwise, I'd say, no, it should be a long-term investment, what I would say. Okay, look at number 3, top of the next page. Cost of engineering activity required to advance the design of a product to the manufacturing stage. What does that sound like? Huh? That sounds like R&D. That sounds like the D part of R&D. So that's R&D expense. Where will it be reported? On the income statement. Number 4, lease prepayment. 6 months rent paid in advance.
That's not intangible.
It's prepaid and it's an asset. Current asset.
Current asset, there you go. Current asset. Okay, number 5, cost of equipment obtained. What? PP&E, that's right. Number 6, the cost of searching for applications of new research findings.
R&D.
That's R&D. That's the D part of R&D. Expensed on the income statement. Number 7, cost incurred in the formation of a corporation. See if you remember chapter 15.
You add it to the call.
What'd you call it?
Organizational.
Organization expense on the income statement. Organization expense on the income statement. Number 8, operating losses incurred in the startup of a business. What did I say just 5 minutes ago? Nothing special about them. Expense as incurred on the income statement. Number 9, training cost incurred in the startup of a business.
Expense as incurred.
That should be expensed as incurred. We haven't had a slam dunk intangible asset yet, have we? Number 10, the purchase cost of a franchise.
Intangible.
That's an intangible asset. Number 11, goodwill generated internally. Expensed as incurred. Not that you generate internally. If you purchase, there's a difference. Number 12, cost of testing in search for product alternatives. That's R&D. Number 13, goodwill acquired in the purchase of a business.
Yeah,
That's an intangible asset. Number 14, the cost of developing a patent.
R&D.
That's R&D. Number 15, the cost of purchasing a patent from an inventor.
IA. Intangible
Huh?
asset. Intangible asset.
That'd be an intangible asset. If it's purchased, we can capitalize it. If we generate it internally, expensed as incurred except certain legal costs. Number 16, legal cost incurred in securing a patent.
Organization expense.
You said legal was intangible.
Certain legal costs can be capitalized, so yes, that would be an intangible asset related to whatever it is, patent, franchise, copyright, whatever you incur the legal costs for. Okay, number 17. Unrecovered cost of a successful legal suit to protect your patent. You know that if you have a patentable product and you have a patent on it, and somebody infringes on your patent, you have to defend it. You have to go after them legally. Okay, you sue and you win, but the other company can't afford to pay you everything that you incurred.
Contingent liability.
We add those costs to the cost of the intangible asset. We add the successful legal cost, the unrecovered legal cost, to the cost of the asset. Number 18, the cost of conceptual formulation of possible product alternatives, R&D. Number 19, the cost of purchasing a copyright. That's an intangible asset. Okay, number 20, research and development costs. Be careful.
Capitalized.
It's research and development expense.
You said be careful.
Well, if you were a fish, you would have been caught when you were a baby. I mean, because you were so easy to hook. Long-term receivables. He would be caught on any bait you throw out there, even dead bait. Long-term receivables. Those should be long-term investments. Cost of developing a trademark. Huh? If you internally generate it, it's expensed as incurred, folks. Right? And then number 23, the cost of purchasing a trademark. That's an intangible asset. Do you know the story behind Exxon?
Oil leak?
No. Tell us.
Exxon was the predecessor, I believe, was Standard Oil Company. And then they got involved, and they got into some legal trouble years ago. And they wanted to leave that name behind, but they operate all over the world. And they wanted a name that did not mean anything in any language. Because it's easy to choose a word that's an insult in some language or something. So they hired a consulting firm to come up with Exxon. And they tested against every known language, and it doesn't mean anything. It's just a made up number of letters. It's not a word in any language. And so you believe they had to pay for that. But since they created it internally, it would be expensed as incurred. If they had bought somebody else's Exxon trade name, then it could be capitalized. Okay, let's go to exercise 2. We're going to go through this list. Now, you're not going to have time. Well, go ahead. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Number your paper to 18. Even though they don't give you numbers, you're going to start with cable television franchises as number 1, music copyrights as number 2, so on and so forth. Now, some of these are going to be, you got to use judgment. It could be 2 different things. You got to tell me what you're thinking. Okay, number 1, cable television franchises, intangible assets. Music copyrights. Intangible assets. Research and development cost.
Expense.
R&D on the income statement. Goodwill. Intangible asset. Cash.
Current asset.
Current asset. Discount on notes payable. Was chapter 14 all that long ago? Didn't we have discounts on bonds payable, discount on note payable? Well, first of all, is it an intangible asset? No. Okay, so where should it be reported? What kind of account is discount on notes payable?
Is it a contra?
It is a contra liability account, right? So where should it be reported? Wherever the notes payable are reported. If the notes payable are current liabilities, it'll be up in current liabilities. If it's notes payable are long-term, then it'll be in long-term liabilities. That's one of those accounts that cannot exist without its friend, notes payable. Okay, accounts receivable.
Current asset.
I'm going to say that's probably current asset. But if it were long-term, where would you put it? Long-term investments, good. Okay, be careful. Property, plant, and equipment. Property, plant, and equipment.
Asset.
Internet domain name. Intangible assets. Film contract rights. That's intangible asset. Customer list.
Intangible assets.
Why would that be an intangible? Why would it be an asset at all?
Because you need customers. Well, you need customers to be able to do business.
But do we need a list?
Well, no, but the list could like be worth something to other people.
Now there's where you're talking about. Our list of customers that do business with us has no value to us. But if somebody wants our customer list to say market their products to, then we can charge them for that. So yes, customer list is an intangible asset. Prepaid expenses.
Current asset.
Current assets. Covenants not to compete. Intangible assets. Brand name. Intangible assets. What about a brand name that has become so closely associated with a product that it's almost a synonym for it?
Intangible asset.
Hmm?
Intangible asset.
No, but I mean, give me an example. Give me an example of a brand name that is so closely associated with the product that sometimes people call the product the brand name. Give me a Kleenex. Kleenex is the brand. Kleenex is.
She thinks milk.
Give me another brand name. Coke. Coca-Cola. People don't really mean I want a Coca-Cola. They just mean I want a soft drink.
Reynolds wrap.
Yes. Xerox. Would you Xerox this for me?
What?
Old people do that. They do that all the time. So I guess back when they came up, Xerox was the only copier in the world.
Google.
So, yeah, Google it. Okay, notes receivable. I say there's a couple of choices here.
Short term.
It could be current assets or it could be long-term investments. I would say current assets, and then in parentheses I'd say I assumed it's current. Investments in affiliated companies. Long-term investments. Organization cost. Expensed on the income statement. Land.
PPE.
Low now.
Huh?
Low now. Depends on what you're using it for.
Okay. I would say this is one of those that has choices. You said PP&E. I would tend to say PP&E, assuming it's in current use. But if it's land held for investment, it would be long-term investments. Could be inventory. Yes, it could. Could be inventory as well, if we're a real estate company. Okay, exercise 3. Joni Hyde has the following amounts reported in its general ledger at the end of the current year. There's several of them listed there. A, on the basis of the information above, compute the total amount to be reported by Hyde for intangible assets on the balance sheet. So when we encounter something, we're either going to put it under intangible assets or somewhere else. If an item is not to be included in intangible assets, we're going to tell where it should be included. Okay, so get ready. Label your paper, exercise 12-3. Create one heading that says intangible assets. And then we're going to list things below that and put the dollar amount to go with it. Then if something doesn't belong in intangible assets, you're going to write it down and say where it does go. All right, you ready? Organization cost. Expense on the income statement. Organization costs should be expensed on the income statement. Trademarks.
Yeah.
Intangibles. So put that in your intangibles column. Trademarks, $15,000. Okay, number 3, discount on bonds payable.
No.
I would say contra long-term liability. Bonds payable are almost always long-term, so contra long-term liability. Okay, now be very careful with this next one. Deposits with an advertising agency for ads to promote the goodwill of the company. Okay, we're Coca-Cola and we're wanting to come up with one of those funny little polar bears drinking our soft drink at Christmas because that gets everybody feeling warm and cuddly. And so we've engaged a advertising agency and we had to pay them a deposit to get them to start working on these ads. First, is that an intangible asset?
No.
No. Then where should it be?
Expense in the income statement.
Not expense.
Amortize.
It should be under current assets, under prepaids. You prepaid. Huh?
What was it again?
Prepaids.
What the heck would be the account for that?
All right, the next one. Excess of cost over the fair value of the net identifiable assets of an acquired subsidiary.
Yes.
That's goodwill. That's an intangible asset. 75,000. So how many things do we have under intangibles? 2. All right, next one. Cost of equipment acquired for R&D projects. The equipment has an alternative future use. Where should you put it? PP&E. Since it has an alternative use, you capitalize it and depreciate it as R&D expense. And the last one. Cost of developing a secret formula for a product that is expected to be marketed for at least 20 years.
Intangible asset.
R&D.
That's R&D.
That's worded weird.
Cost of developing a secret formula. Like the Coca-Cola formula. It's supposed to be locked up in a vault in Atlanta. So that's R&D. So, how much do your intangible assets total? 90?
Yeah.
90,000. Questions? Okay, I'm gonna do exercise 7. Okay, let's look at exercise 7. It says, in early January of 16, Outcast Corporation applied for a trade name, incurring legal cost of $16,000. Okay, so legal costs can be capitalized. In January of 17, Outcast incurred $7,800 of legal fees in a successful defense of its trade name. And then A, they start telling us what to do. Okay? So, first thing, I'm going to create a T account for my intangible asset called trade name. And in 1 of 16, I incurred $16,000 of cost, legal costs. So all the cost in developing the trade name, I didn't get to capitalize. But now that I have a trade name that I've decided on, now I can capitalize the legal costs. A says, compute 2016 amortization, 12/31/16 book value, 2017 amortization, and 12/31/17 book value if the company amortizes the trade name over 10 years. Okay, so watch how easy this is to do if you use T accounts. 16,000 divided by 10 would be 1,600. That is amortization expense for 16. Then my 12/31/16 book value is 14,400. That's my second answer. Are you with me? Then it says that in January of 17, we incurred 7,800 of legal costs in a successful defense. So we add that cost to the intangible asset, and so now we have 21,22,2. All right, now how long do we have to spread that over? 9 years left, right? So somebody please divide 22,200 by 9. Anybody other than Mr. Jackson?
2467.
How much?
2467.
2467. Okay, so that is my amortization expense for 17. And my 12/31/17 book value should be 19 what? $733?
Yes.
Okay, so those are your 4 answers. So if I gave you this question or a question like this on the exam, you could just do a T account and label it, and that's it. Now don't just give me a T account with a bunch of numbers in it and say, go looking for an answer, please. No, I'm gonna look for what's in a box or circled or double underlined or something. Okay, now B is gonna change it up on us. See what B says. compute the 2017 amortization and the 12/31/17 book value, assuming that at the beginning of 17, Outcast determines that the trade name will provide no future benefit beyond December 31 of 2020. Okay, so we gotta get all the way down here to 1/1 of 17. We have 22,200. Okay? So how many years are left? 17, 18, 19, and 20. 4 years are left from the start of 1/1 of 17. So now divide 22,200 by 4. 5,550?
Yes.
That will be your amortization expense for 17. And your 12/31/17 book value will be 16 what? $650? How are we doing? T accounts are our friend. Now, let's talk about this. We had up here earlier, trade name was an indefinite life intangible. But they just decided this trade name can move from indefinite life to limited life, right? Well, Coca-Cola can be a trade name that's used forever as long as it's a successful brand and they continue to use it. They can use Coca-Cola as a trade name forever. But think about GM when they decided to discontinue the Saturn brand of automobiles. Well, so then it moved from an indefinite life intangible to a limited life intangible because they're not using it anymore, not advertising it. So it can move to a limited life. All right. In this case, they said it was 10 years in the first case, and then they changed it to 4 years from the date of 1/1 of 17. Let's go to C. C says, ignoring Part B, compute 2018 amortization and the 12/31/18 book value, assuming that at the beginning of 18, based on new market research, Outcast determines that the fair value of the trade name is $15,000. Estimated total future cash flows from the trade name is $16,000 from January 3rd of 18. Okay, so here we go. Let's come all the way down here to 12/31 of 17. It is 19,733. Okay? So that is also the balance on 1/1 of 18. Okay? And so look what they tell us. They say your future cash flows are $16,000. So here I'm going to tell you recoverability test. Okay? My future cash flows equal 16,000. My carrying value is 19,733. Did we pass the recoverability test? We failed it. So what do? Write it down to fair value. Okay? So, and what did they tell me the fair value is? 15,000, right? Okay, so the first thing I want you to do, even though they didn't ask you to do it, what journal entry will you prepare on 1/3/18? Debit?
I don't know what I was holding lost. Or is it lost on sale?
Loss on impairment and credit trade name. And how much is it gonna be? 4733? Where will that loss on impairment be reported? On the income statement, where? Other expenses and losses section of the income statement. Okay, now, what they're asking us for is, what is amortization expense for 18, and what is your 12/31/18 book value? Well, we got to go back up here. When we started, it had a 10-year life. 16 and 17 have passed, so it has an 8-year life starting on January 1/18. So take your 15,000 and divide by 8. Say it again. 1875. So that is your amortization expense. And then my book value will be 13,125.
Yes.
$13,125. Questions? Do you see how useful T accounts can be? Please use them. You will never be sorry. Questions? Okay, I want you to do exercise 9 for homework. And 13. You do 9 and 13, and I'll do the rest on Thursday. And on Thursday, now you need to be here because we will talk about when to have our review on the weekend. If you're not here, you don't get a voice.
Are we gonna try and do the line under class on Thursday?
It might be better for us to, because I mean, we're not gonna have that, 3 hours to do it. I think it might be better for you to come in to the review class and say, I have a question about this one, and that one, and that one, and we'll do them that way. Instead of trying to do all, it'd be 3 hours if we try to do all 3 chapters. Whether what? Whether it be Tuesday or Thursday, yes. We'll do that on Thursday. I'm leaning toward Tuesday. Get it done, get it over with. All right, thank you for coming. Good day.
Yeah, Tuesday. Wait, that's the 4th of July that weekend.
Yeah, exactly. Fortunately, it's Wednesday, so I don't want to do it Thursday.
You're right. I didn't know. We just wasn't thinking. Any patience? Apparently not.
A MAC is just, no. A MAC is, you're taking only accounting classes, pretty much. And you will get a master's in accounting. An MBA, you're gonna take 1 or 2 classes in management.
She doesn't want to get anywhere near you.
Classes in economics and all that. And you'll get a business.
What is that?
Well, yes, I need to take more accounting for what I wanted to do.
Hey, pick up your trash.
I mean, because if you say, I wanna go into public accounting,
What?
you don't know what you're doing. You don't